The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TCA's Professional Development Webinar, an insider's view of corporate funding with Joy Partain. We are kicking off, believe it or not, our fourth year of free professional development webinars, and we love doing these, and we love the response we get, and we hope you find these helpful, and we're so pleased that Joy is able to share her time with us today. Now, one of the great things about the webinar format, especially here live, is the ability to take your questions at the end. So let's make sure that everybody's able to participate. So find that questions box on the right-hand side of your screen in the GoToWebinar toolbar. And just type in a hello and let us know that you found it and can participate. Love to see those hellos out there. Hello from Austin, and look at that, Dallas and Fort Worth and Houston. Great to have you all here. Wonderful. So this is where you'll enter questions throughout the webinar. And if you have any issues during the webinar, you can send them to me using this tool as well. I'm Derek Mudd, and I'm a program administrator here at TCA. And in this series, TCA staff has curated topics and speakers to provide strategies and effective practices in arts administration that we believe will be helpful for arts organizations. We also take suggestions from you, and we are always looking for topics that will be of interest and service to you. So if you have questions or suggestions or topics for speakers in the future, please email those to me at derek@arts.texas.gov. As you can see, we do these every other month on the third Wednesday of the month, and the registration is on a first-come, first-served basis. This was a very popular webinar this time, so I'm sorry that we didn't have the capability for more people to join us today, but we will be recording this webinar, and it'll be archived on vimeo.com, and we'll also send you a PDF of the slide presentation after this webinar, and it's also available upon request. Like I said earlier, you can send in those questions throughout, and we'll take those following Joy's presentation. Speaking of Joy, I'd like to welcome her today. Joy Partain's career has spanned a variety of nonprofit and for-profit settings. She is a recognized leader in the greater Houston community's civic and philanthropic scene, and she brings nearly 2 decades of experience in public relations, corporate philanthropy, brand management, and government affairs. She has led teams at Houston Grand Opera, Fort Worth Opera, Amegy Bank, and the Kroger Company. And this year, she joined the Asia Society Texas Center as its Deputy Executive Director. She is a frequent guest lecturer on corporate philanthropy and cause marketing at seminars and conferences, and we are so glad to have her here today. Welcome, Joy.
Thank you so much. It's quite nice to hear that this was a popular one. And I do want to start out by saying what my motive is for doing these so that you kind of know what you're getting for your money, although it's free. So if you don't like it, you can let Derek know later. The first time that I went to the corporate side after being with Houston Grand Opera for 7 years, I was doing the opposite of development. I was a funder for the first time, and I really was horrified by the kinds of proposals I got and found myself thinking almost every day, gosh, if only my friends in development knew the mistakes they were making. So I started speaking anytime anybody asked, for the AMA, for the AFP, for PRSA, any arrangement of letters you can think of. I spoke anytime they wanted me to about how to do effective corporate philanthropy so that nonprofits are more likely to get money, have their programs funded, and create long-lasting relationships with their funders and have it be an actual relationship and not just transactional. So it's become a real passion of mine. I have been, you can see in the next slide, Derek, you can advance, on the nonprofit side and the for-profit side a couple times each, and I don't consider myself a native of one or the other. I consider myself a hybrid. So this advice comes from having straddled both worlds for quite a long time. So I hope you will find it useful. Next slide. So first of all, where do you find these people, especially if you are approaching a company for the first time, or a company is getting bought out, or there's been an org chart shift? What it's usually called is CSR, corporate social responsibility, or any of those titles on the left side. And where it lives is any of those departments on the right. For me, it has always been inside of corporate comms or external affairs. And when I was at Kroger, it went through 3 changes of name while I was there. It started out as, let's see, consumer affairs, which implied customer relations, and I certainly wasn't, and then public affairs, and then corporate affairs. Sometimes for oil and gas companies, it's under sustainability because it speaks to what they're trying to do for the environment. Sometimes it's under HR, particularly with smaller companies or companies where the area just isn't really fleshed out and they haven't ever hired a full-time person for it, and it's being done off the side of somebody's desk. And sometimes it's under government affairs because it's it can be viewed as a function of external affairs. Who do we deal with outside our company? And often for certain companies in certain sectors, that's a lot of politicians, and then naturally nonprofits. And sometimes that does mix. When I was at Kroger, way more so than when I was at Amegy, a lot of politicians requested donations for projects in their district that certain nonprofits were doing, and they were the go-between, not the nonprofit. And so that, it gets murky. So having somebody that deals with politicians and nonprofits and it's all under one umbrella does kind of make sense. Next slide. So the big question I'm sure you have is, what do companies think about when they are considering giving you money? And especially, I'm sure, for a new relationship or a company, like I said, that's just merged, or they're shifting their focus, or you're doing a new program that you've never solicited them for before. So obviously the first one, is it a 501c3? Some companies will give money to chambers or pass through, golf tournaments that are started by a for-profit or a chamber or a business organization, and the money ends up with a hospital or a children's charity, and some won't. Sometimes they view this bucket as marketing, and really it is marketing. So sometimes if it is under the marketing bucket, there isn't a requirement that it has to be a C3. But if you are a C3, definitely push that, because they know that that means a higher standard of accountability. Does it fit one of the corporation's giving pillars? I cannot stress this enough. If you are asking a company that supports sustainability and the environment and women and children's health and, the disease of the month, but they don't support the arts, you're barking up the wrong tree, because no matter how big the pot is finite, and they're not going to give it to charities that don't function in that space. The one exception I can point out is, education. A lot of arts organizations, of course, do a lot of education. So if the company you're soliciting is strong in the education sector, but not the arts, you can sometimes get in the door through the education avenue, but you really have to have strong numbers and a strong case to show why this, out of all of the possible things they can support in education, fits their bucket. I will say a lot of companies in the oil and gas energy space are expanding their definition from STEM to STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, but it's taken a while to get them there. And it's probably still not going to be as much money as you could get from companies that do have the arts as one of their pillars. And of course, your time is valuable. You probably don't have enough staff. So low-hanging fruit is always easier. So if an org really doesn't participate in the arts space, they're probably not going to make an exception for you, no matter how wonderful you are. Is it in a community that they serve? And think outside of their store or their corporate headquarters. Think about where their offices are, their warehouses, or their plants. But if they have no representation where you are, they probably are not going to give. It just doesn't make sense. What visibility would they get from it? Why would their employees be grateful for it? Why would the local mayor be grateful for it? If they have no presence there, it's just not going to be a good place to spend their money. Is the nonprofit well managed? And we, of course, all like to think that we are, but it's good for you to know what GuideStar and Charity Navigator say about you, because the savvier funders will check there and not just your website, because they know your website is, us bragging about ourselves, but GuideStar and Charity Navigator are more neutral. So know what's out there, know what's being said about you. And of course, I would never go to a new funder if you've just been in the media negatively, or if there was a big staff and board fight, if your last ED was fired for cause, or if any of your board members just got escorted to jail. And by the way, if that does happen, I would make sure that your ED or your DOD, whoever the funding community in your city trusts, reach out and have a conversation about what happened and what the board is doing to make sure it doesn't happen again, what action has been taken, especially in this era of Me Too. If you know that that kind of scandal is coming, get in front of it and have conversations with your board and your major funders so that they don't feel sideswiped by it. You never want a funder to call up and say, how the heck did you end up on the front page of the paper and my president saw it and it was a negative story about you and you didn't give me any warning? Because you are an extension of their brand if they are funding you, especially if they are funding a lot of what you do or if they've been with you a long time. You need to steward their reputation just like you steward their dollars. Next slide. So what are the metrics? And I know this is really hard to measure in the arts. How do you measure happiness? How do you measure the feeling that people have after they see a show or go through a museum versus before they sat in that chair or walked into the museum? But there are metrics that the arts can point to. How many people entered your building or saw your shows this year versus last year? Or how much did your education programs in the schools expand? How many seniors did you reach? How many hospitals did you take that touring program to? But besides numbers, how do you define success? And I realize that's really hard for us. It's way different than measuring meals if you're a food bank, or number of patients served, or number of books handed out. But you know your programs and how you can measure those things. So if your program people aren't measuring, they absolutely need to. And everybody needs to agree on how you're going to measure. Is it number of clicks when they walk, is somebody at the front door if it's not ticketed, so you can't count tickets? Is somebody there with a clicker? What are the metrics everybody's going to agree on so that you have some stability of numbers every year? And are you making a dent in whatever program you've outlined? If it's that you're providing, let's say education again, arts education in schools because the school district has no money for it, are you able to get into more classrooms, or are you deepening their education somehow? Are you now working with all of the math teachers to show how, music theory and math are based on the same principles? Or are you weaving your visual arts into their history learning? How are you helping move the needle on whatever issue it is you say you address? How many years has the company supported it already? They aren't going to want to support the same program at the same level with the same organization year after year. So do consider that if it's been 3, 4, 5 years, they might call you and say that they need to either reduce their funding or move on. So before they call you, you proactively can figure out, well, what program could we offer them next? Or how can we get them to ramp up? Or if they really loved this program, how do we offer them, go from silver to gold with them, or offer them a second night of it, or find some way that whatever it is that they really like about what you're doing, you can offer them more of it. Can the company provide what the nonprofit is requesting? This is especially key if you're asking them for product of some kind, or anything that isn't cash, essentially. Some nonprofits think that the corporate sector just has tons and tons of whatever it is they make, and that it's sitting in a truck or a warehouse ready to give away. And that just isn't the case. Most of us on the corporate side, if we make a product, still have to pay for it from our budget. It doesn't just fall off a truck, or we don't go to the warehouse and do a sweep of the shelves and then come to you and say, here it all is. So be mindful of whether they can provide what it is you're asking in the first place. Does the corporation need more visibility in this space or with this particular demographic, or have they already locked this down? If you're going to a company that's well known for arts funding, but let's say their dance card is full, they support everybody in town, and they've never supported you before, they might not, because they feel like, okay, we've done enough in the arts, we're not doing as much in, say the environment, and the environment is one of our pillars, so we really need to do more there. However, if they say they're about the arts and they're only supporting 3 or 4, then you probably are a prime target. So just be mindful of how many places around town do you see their name. If they own everything in the arts, they might not have room for you. If they own a few, then great. If none, then you are probably not one of their pillars. And you can always find that on their websites. Most companies now want credit from their stockholders or their board of directors or their communities, their customers, whatever, for the good they're doing in the community. So you will be able to find on their website what sectors they support, how much money they spend a year, whether they give only domestically or internationally as well, all of those things. So you really never have an excuse for not knowing what they fund, because they brag about it. I've helped write those things. So that stuff definitely is out there. And if you've been, rinse and repeating the same proposal every year, you might want to just check and make sure that nothing has changed with 5 minutes on their website to make sure that they haven't cut the arts out or left, closed the warehouse that's in your city or something, any reason that they would have to cut back on funding to you. Next slide. And you definitely need to answer the WIFM, what's in it for me? Put yourself in their shoes and figure out, why should they donate to you amongst all of the other charities they could be donating to? And here are 3 key questions for that. Is what you're offering to them, is it going to give them good visibility? And by visibility, I mean places that their logo can be, whether it's on the outside of your building, on an electronic marquee, or it's in your playbill, or it's on the website, or it's in their Facebook feed, or you're going to shout them out at the top of the program, or you're going to have their president kick off your series, something. All of those things are very important, because they want the community, of course, to know how they are helping. Corporations do not have the luxury of giving anonymously like the uber wealthy, family foundations do. Corporations are doing this, obviously, not just for goodwill, but also to increase market penetration and customer loyalty. So you need to give them that visibility, or they can take their money to somebody else. There are lots of people competing for those finite dollars. Do the activation elements fit them? Now, that's different than visibility. Activation is, how can they be there interacting with your constituents? Can you take us to the next slide? And I'll show you some of the ways that companies want to be out and about. So this slide shows a couple different ways. In the bottom right, obviously, this was some kind of Christmas festival, and we were sampling food. In the top right, that's the Katy Sip and Stroll. Katy is an affluent community west of Houston, and this is a big wine and cheese walk around kind of festival. And so our highest end things were there: wine, beautiful flowers, Murray's Cheese, which is a high end New York boutique cheese shop that only Kroger has outside of New York. Same thing, bottom left, there's another Murray's Cheese thing. Top left, Strawberry Festival in Pasadena. That's a totally different demographic. That's all families. It's not as niche or high end. So obviously we would bring different things there. And so the point of activation is how can they interact with your people in terms of sampling or volunteering in an event. Derek, take us to the next slide and you'll see some more examples. See all those people in pink, that's obviously a breast cancer event. Bottom left, that's a chef, so another foodie kind of thing. Top left, volunteering at a kids festival. So how are the ways that company can get their people or their product out there with your people? Maybe you offer them a way to, if you have a corporate breakfast that's hard to get into, or you can give a product, one of their products in the valet cars on the way home from a performance, or give their VP an opportunity to speak when you open your season or on opening night of a particular production. So do the activation elements fit them, and do think about what your competition, and I use that word on purpose, what are the other arts orgs offering? Anytime you go to somebody else's performance, look around, see what they're putting on the marquee, look at what's in their playbill, look at what's in their lobby, take note of how they thank people, the different levels. There's nothing new under the sun, so we all borrow good ideas from each other. Next slide. And this is one more hint. When you do talk about visibility, make sure you're doing it in a tiered, easy to recognize fashion. This is a terrible example of visibility. Click on to the next slide. Now, can you remember even 5 of the companies that you saw on that slide besides Kroger? Obviously, I'm talking about Kroger, and besides Torchy's Tacos, which are very, very popular. Can you remember 5 of the others? Probably not. Take us back to that for a moment, Derek. It's just a hodgepodge mush of logos, and this is not what any funder wants to see. This feels like they just couldn't disappoint anybody, and everybody got logo coverage. There's no levels. There's no way to know which ones gave the most. The size of the logo might not even represent that. It might just be that somebody didn't know how to stretch or reduce them. So if you're going to give logo credit, make sure you have some standards for it. Most organizations, have the gold, silver, and platinum, or the founders level, the conductor, and the impresario level, since we're talking about the arts. But you cannot give logo placement to everybody, because this is what you end up with. And consider you can stack logos, who gets logo recognition in different portals as well. If your platinum sponsor gets logo recognition everywhere, and your gold gets it in the playbill, and silver gets it online only, you have different tiers, and some can be name only, and some can get logo, and some can be black and white, and some can be color, but you definitely want tiers to be clear. Can we go back 2 more slides? Okay, and then lastly, are the sponsorship benefits useful? So the benefits, not activation, not visibility, but the actual hard, tangible things they're going to get from you. Tickets, obviously, in the arts are the most popular benefit. However, if they're supporting education in your city, your arts education programs, and lots of volunteers are helping with that, then high-end tickets to a gala or a concert might not be a good fit. Or if they are your premier sponsor of your entire series, then tickets to opening night probably do fit, and not to your quote lower end, your school programs or a street festival that you're participating in. The benefits need to fit and make sure they can be useful. When I was at Kroger, we would support a lot of family festivals that happen on holidays. And if we were given tickets for those, I really couldn't use them, because I can't ask store employees to leave on Thanksgiving or Christmas Eve or Valentine's Day. These are all big sales days. So if you give me tickets for that, I can't use them I can't pick and choose which stores are going to be unstaffed. So any retail companies are going to have a hard time accepting benefits that relate to holidays. Same thing with, like, if you give them, for museum side, if you give them 50 corporate memberships, well, if they have, 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 employees in your city, how are they going to use 50 well? And obviously you can't afford to give them 1,000 or 1,500. So maybe if that's a meaningful benefit, suggest that they give it to top sales employees or employees that have just moved here as a way for them to get to know your city, or people that have just exceeded sales goals with a particular philanthropic program that company really believes in, and that's a way to tie you to another charity that might not be in the arts, or a way for a new VP or district manager to take out their lieutenants to get to know them better. So if you have benefits that are limited in number, help the company picture how they're going to use them so that those tickets don't just sit in the funder's desk or completely go unused. Other benefits that are useful: backstage passes. Definitely, if you don't have backstage tours for your funder, do that and have them bring the people that have never been in your building before, so lots of people will fall in love with you. But think of benefits, everything on this page, from the company's perspective. What's going to be meaningful to them? And ask. It does not hurt to say, what have you seen other charities do that was useful, or what have we offered you in the past that was useful or not useful? You don't want to load them down with things that they can't use and then feel guilty about. And you also don't want them sitting there wishing that you would give them what's useful to them. Can you take us to the next slide that has new text on it? Okay, this is a really fantastic, and the next few slides are all about the Houston International Festival, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. But I wanted to share a really good example of documentation for a funder. This basically was just a rewrite of what they promised us ahead of time in the sponsorship packet, but it followed up with, you got all of this. And of course, a lot of this on this page is about media exposure. Do include that. If you know you'll be advertising, then include the places that you can promise their logo will be seen. And don't forget levels. Don't promise it to everybody. But this documented for me, and so I could share it with the people above me. Remember, you're not just courting your funder, you were courting whoever they report to. So it shows everything that they were going to give us. Next slide. And in this shows us the demographics. Now, one of the reasons I loved iFest from a funding standpoint is they had volunteers outside every gate, and when people left, they would do exit surveys with them. Of course, not everybody stops and says, yes, I'll answer these questions, but enough people that they felt confident in their data, and they had fabulous demographics and audience data. And so that's very attractive to funders because they want to know, who are they reaching? If the company knows that they have a gap and they don't have goodwill amongst African Americans, or they don't have goodwill amongst first generation Asians, then if you know that you are well represented with those demographics, you're going to be more attractive to them than if you just say, well, 10,000 people come. Well, 10,000 of what demographic? Families, women over 40, men under 20. If you have that data, make sure you tell them. And again, this just shows all the media that they got, which the PR person is tracking anyway, believe me. So it helps demonstrate, well, your PR person should be tracking. It helps you demonstrate why you were a good investment for that funder. Next slide. And pictures. Don't underestimate the value of pictures, especially because a funder can't get to everything that they're underwriting. There's no way. And even if they could, their VP or their president or their SVP of whatever at corporate is definitely not going to get there. So the more pictures you can give them that are high res and quick, not 3 months later, is very helpful to them because they can demonstrate to their internal constituents how they're using the money wisely. And also, I want to point out that those t-shirts that say Kroger cares about the community, those yellow shirts, those are not on Kroger employees. you can offer to your funders that if, for instance, if it was something around Christmas time and I definitely couldn't send employees, I could give them yellow t-shirts and have the organization's employees wear them, or the organization's volunteers. If I trusted that nonprofit and I knew that, their people were usually well behaved and I always heard good things about their festival or their children's event or their Christmas parade, then heck yeah, t-shirts are cheap. And then I have plenty of exposure there, even if I can't bring my own people. So do consider that. It's another way to offer them visibility without them having to send their own people. Next slide. I love this slide because of all of that attendee data that iFest used to get when people left. One of the things they asked them was this question 19, who were the sponsors that year, to get people's impressions, of what stuck with them. And I want to point out, obviously Kroger isn't very big. It's on the bottom left in red. However, above that a little bit in green, those three little letters, HEB, are Kroger's chief competitor in the Houston market. And HEB vastly outspent me that year. They sponsored a whole stage. I couldn't afford to do it that year. I think this was the first year we sponsored iFest. So we just did free Kids Day. Go back one slide. You can see behind the girls in the yellow shirts, Kids Free Sunday. So it was one day that any kids got in free. Now, obviously, if you didn't have kids, you didn't care about that, but groceries are bought by families in higher numbers than singles or seniors. So families are who grocers pitch to the most. So sponsoring Kids Free Day was a lot more useful to me and a lot cheaper than an entire stage. And it paid off because it was targeted. People remembered it more than just one stage out of all of the stages that our competitor sponsored. So look for ways that you can own a corner of something, a piece of something that you can wholly own versus playing second fiddle or third or fourth to that the funder can look for ways they can own something versus the second, third, or fourth fiddle that their competitor is playing. If you can offer that to people in the corporate space, that will put your name on this and you're the only funder that gets this, or it's the only day, or it's the only whatever. Look for something they can wholly own versus them being the silver sponsor that nobody's going to remember. Next slide. So we've talked about the three elements of what they are looking for, and try as hard as you can to picture what's useful to them and ask. Ask before you pitch them and ask them after the project has ended. If they went, definitely get their feedback. If they didn't, then after you do your stewardship, ask them if it met their expectations. Next slide. So, here are some easy rules, and they might seem self-evident, but believe me, I've seen frequent mistakes in all of these. So the first one, do your homework. I already mentioned this is out there, it's on websites, but not just what the company funds, but also the size of what they fund, whether you meet the usual guidelines for them, if you're in their ballpark. Try to find out from other organizations, other nonprofits, how much that charity, how much a charity your size usually gets in a first-time gift. I can't tell you the number of times, both when I was at Amegy Bank and when I was at Kroger, that I was sent a proposal for 5 to 10 times the amount that I could probably give that charity given its size, how long we had been granting them, the size of the program they were doing, the market it was in, et cetera, all those things that we might look at. For the first time a particular program or a particular charity was asking, it was way more than what we could justifiably do. So do your best to figure out, the right size, the right kind of program to ask them for. Also consider the company size. If you're asking a small startup oil and gas company for money, that's way different than asking Chevron or Exxon. Or if you're asking a little family-owned bank or a little credit union, that's way different than asking Chase or Wells Fargo. So, the size of your ask really needs to morph depending on the company that you're working with. Patience is a virtue. There is always more on your funders' plates than you'd think. And I get in nonprofits, we're stretched for staff, but believe me, the corporate space is too, because they are trying to run as big a profit as they can, so Wall Street will be happy with them. So they try to keep their head count down as much as possible. When I was at Kroger, I was in charge of grant making and PR and government affairs. That always seemed like too much for one person's plate. So I was always having to choose, and I always felt like I was disappointing people. So realize that the people you're sending proposals to, or the people who are checking the online portal where donations are input, always have more on their plate than you'd think. So if you feel like, okay, well, I sent that proposal last Friday and it's Wednesday, maybe I ought to call. No, wait until the following Wednesday. It always lengthen the amount of time before you check back. Brevity is a virtue too. They really don't need, now foundations probably do. They have the time to do more digging, but a corporation doesn't need your 990 and your board list and your budget from the last 5 years and your articles of incorporation. They really don't. They need 3 pages max, depending on the size of your if you're asking them for a $50,000 grant, then give them more. But if it's to underwrite one festival for one weekend, or a children's event over, one school year, but it's not the lead or even the second, just tailor the amount you give them to the time they've got. It's very, funders feel guilt trips, just like everybody else in society. And if I can't get through all the material that you have sent me, I might just put it to the bottom time after time after time, because I feel bad that I can't get through it all, and it deserves my full attention, but it's never going to get it. And so you're never going to get an answer. So brief is better than all encompassing. And of course, always tell the truth. You'd think I wouldn't have to say this, but unfortunately, it's the case that charities inflate their numbers, or they say they're the only ones who deal with, and I'll take this out of the arts, only ones who deal with childhood hunger on the east side of Houston. And that's absolutely not true of anybody. There are lots of charities that are dealing with that, or the only ones who serve veterans in this particular part of the city, or are helping the homeless find jobs in, if you define your niche small enough, sure, you might be the only one, but you better make sure you are the only one, because funders talk to other funders. We know who our colleagues are, just like you know who your colleagues are in other arts organizations, and we can find if you're stretching the truth or lying. And that might hurt your chances, not just with that funder for funding, but everybody they know. It's not like we go around gossiping, but if we're at a professional organization, we might say, hey, do you know such and such organization? We've never funded them, and they just sent me a proposal. I would give my colleagues that information. And if somebody had burned us because they said they were the only, or they promised us logo placement and we never got it, or they said that our president could speak and then at the last minute they yanked that opportunity, that stuff, we do remember those things. So always tell the truth, and always, remember, integrity is the only thing you have. It is the only thing that we have in this business, whether we're on the funding side or the asking side. Our name, our reputation, that's it. Most of us produce a thing. We are not the ones doing the artwork. So our reputations, our relationships, that's all we got. Don't use the shotgun method. If you don't know who the right person is in the organization, don't send it to everybody you find on the website. Make a call and find out. If you happen to know the VP and the funder, then that's fine, but no more than a couple. Same thing with jumping heads. If you get a no from the funder, don't send it to their boss's boss. The boss's boss is not going to look at it. The secretary is going to kick it back down the hall, and then the funder that said no has even more of a reason to say no next time. Most of us aren't vindictive, but some of us are, and it's not good business practice. Likewise, don't be a stranger. After you get funding, make sure you steward it in whatever way is appropriate. If it was only, $500, then don't spend $1 gazillion on stewardship. But if it was a significant gift, send them photos as soon as you can. It needs to be JPEGs, by the way. Don't make those photo books because they can't use them. It might sit on their desk, but they can't share that internally like they can with JPEGs. Those can be sent to a board or a committee or a department or put up in a PowerPoint that's shared at the next staff meeting, sent to their boss, who might send it to their boss, who might send it to their boss. So JPEGs are always more useful and obviously free, and those photo books aren't. So make sure you get back to them, tell them how that project went. And if the news is bad, if it got, if it was rainy and then it cleared up, but still nobody came because they were expecting it to rain, or there was terrible construction and nobody knew how to get there, or a concert was canceled, or it just didn't have the resonance in the community that marketing thought it would, and it didn't reach the numbers, then say that. There's some sugar coating you can do, but tell them what happened and tell them what the organization has learned from it. Because if they were really motivated by that program, then they might want to fund it next year with the tweaks you have in mind. It's all real money. In kind is very popular for companies that make something like grocers. And the reason I bring that up is not just because I used to be with one, but also most organizations need food or drinks for any event they're having. They want to have cocktail hour, or they want to feed all the volunteers at something, or they're having a breakfast meeting with their board. Food and drink is a useful and common donation request, but make sure you credit them just as you would a cash donor, because believe me, they did pay cash for it. It came out of their budget. It wasn't free. So don't treat them as a second-class citizen just because they gave you product. You needed the product. You didn't have to pay for it. So treat it like it's a real donation, because it is. Including levels. I really don't like to see corporations squirreled under in kind or pro bono on the back page of a playbill in tiny font when the companies that gave cash are 3 times that size, and maybe it was the same size gift. It's just one was product and one was cash. Don't do that to your funders. Number 9, the name is Bond, James Bond. Get the name right, not just the company name, but the person's name. If it's Chris and you've never met Chris and you don't know if Chris is male or female, call up and find out. You can even, call the secretary, call the front desk and ask if you don't want to call Chris directly. It's really off-putting to anybody. What's the phrase? The sweetest sound any of us hears is our name. I've gotten a lot of letters addressed to Mr. Joy Partain before. I've gotten letters addressed to Joyce. I've gotten letters addressed to the person that used to have my job. Or the person that had my job 4 people ago. Make sure your information is up to date. And the company name too. If there's been mergers, make sure you know what they're called now. When I was at Amegy, I used to get letters for Southwest Bank of Texas, and then I would know that just off the bat, we hadn't funded them in a while because we hadn't been Southwest Bank of Texas for 4 or 5 years. So if your information is up to date, you're not making a good impression with that organization. And given the number of charities that ask for money and all the proposals they're looking at, you only have time sometimes for a first impression. So make sure it's a good one. And lastly, dance with the one who brung you. Not all companies expect exclusivity, but it is becoming more and more popular. If Chevron, for instance, is your top funder of your gala or performance series or your next exhibition, then don't go and ask Exxon for the same amount of money or even less. Chevron is going to expect they'll be the only oil company there. If you're getting a lot of money from Chase, then don't go and ask B of A, or BBVA, Compass, any of their competitors for money. Now, if it's an event where everybody, holds hands and sings Kumbaya and they all fund it, which is popular in hunger, all grocers support hunger, all banks support financial literacy. If it's one of those kinds of things, for the arts, obviously an education thing would be a ringer. Then that's okay. But if it's something where you've only had one funder in a particular sector, do not go to their competition. And, if they haven't renewed a gift this year, then keep checking back with them and give them a deadline and say, I'm sorry, we'll have to move on if we haven't heard from you by X date. And then you're free to go to their competition. But if you have a gift from them this year for a particular event, do not ask their competition. It's fine to ask their competition to fund something else during the year. If it's not the gala, have them fund the golf tournament. If it's not the golf tournament, have them fund the whatever, but not at the same event. I was just at a luncheon last week downtown where there were 3 bank tables in a row, and I really couldn't believe it. It was with a charity that's usually much better at that. And those banks are all okay with them funding, but they probably didn't want to be seated right next to each other. Next slide. This is just an illustration of everything that a funder might be doing at the same time. A few months, sorry, not a few months ago, a couple of years ago, this was everything we were doing in October, I think. And you might know Super Bowl of Caring is usually in January, February, but Super Bowl of Caring was having a big luncheon that year in October, and we were the presenting sponsor. Susan G. Komen, most of those walks are in October. All of these things had a major event in October. Not just where we were writing a check, not just where we were sending volunteers, but where we were maybe writing a check and sending volunteers and sending product and soliciting on their behalf. So major things. That was just 1 month. So try to remember that you're only, shilling for one organization. They are trying to split themselves up among all the nonprofits they're supporting. Next slide. We talked about all of that, I think. And next slide. One last thing before we go to Q&A. If your charity is in a market in Texas where there are Kroger stores and you're not participating in this, you are leaving money on the table. This is an absolutely free program. It's free for customers. It's free for charities to sign up. And if you publicize it well, you can get a lot more money through this than you could as an arts organization, because the arts are not one of Kroger's pillars. So this is a totally separate budget. And I want to point out a lot of retail companies have this. A lot of grocers do. Amazon does. A lot of companies have this that reward their customers for their shopping loyalty by letting the customers designate some of their money to their favorite nonprofit. So if you're in a city that has this kind of program and you're not publicizing it to your board, volunteers, clients, your ticket buyers, anywhere you can, in your magazine, online, on Facebook, in your playbill, then you're just turning away money that you really don't have to work for except telling people about it. You don't have to send a proposal. You don't need to give them gala tickets. You don't need to give them a site visit. You just need to tell people about it. So look around at the companies that have these in your city and see if your organization is a part of them, and when is the last time you publicized it to people. Next. Okay, this is your turn. What would you like to ask? What didn't make sense to you? What did you feel like, no, that's not how it works in my city? What can I answer for you?
All right, great. Thank you, Joy. Several folks have asked questions during the presentation. I'll go ahead and start with those, but I encourage anyone else out there who has a question to go ahead and submit that now, and we'll try to get to it in the next 10 minutes or so. Let's see, if we have a question from a rural community here. How do I find corporations in my community?
It probably is hard in rural areas. So don't look for corporate headquarters. Look for plants or manufacturing centers, distribution centers. If you're really rural and far away from big cities, how is the stuff that's being sold in your city getting there? Is there a plant nearby? Is there an alumni group in that city? But there's no reason that large companies, if they have a presence there but not a headquarters, the Kroger Houston division, quote unquote, goes all the way west to Bryan College Station. I was only in Bryan College Station maybe once a year, but I still funded plenty out in Bryan College Station. So it's not like the person has to be sitting in your city. If there's representation of some kind in your area, whether that's a plant or a distribution center or an alumni group, any of those things, then you still have a chance. It doesn't have to be a headquarters. And you can find those things on their website. But, look around in your town. Where do you spend money? Who do you spend it with? Those are the companies to look at. I was always surprised when nonprofits would ask us for tons of money and customers, not nonprofits necessarily, but customers who volunteered with those charities. And they'd say, but I spend X amount with you every week. And I'd say, yeah, but okay, so do thousands of other people. But are you asking your, say, car dealership? You spend a lot more when you buy a car than you spend with us on groceries. But does anybody ever think to ask their car dealership where they spend a lot more money? So consider the places where you spend money, not just how frequently you're there, but what are the what are the businesses in town that everybody goes to or that have high profit margins? Think about that too. Grocers have very low profit margins. Oil companies, banks, hospitals, much higher.
Another attendee asks, are we just talking about donations of goods? What about dollars?
I was talking about both. These rules apply to both in terms of stewardship, how far in advance you ask, the kinds of programs you're asking them to fund. The rules apply to both. And the same person is usually making those decisions. I had a budget and I could spend it on cash, buying a table with something or writing a check for something, or spending it in product. I could obviously get more bang for my buck with product, but it was still the same budget.
Great. Let's see here. How do you effectively steward gifts that are received through a corporation's website where there is no personal interaction?
Well, and a lot of companies are going to that, trying to put more buffers and filters in place because they just don't have the manpower. I mean, if I could sit down and have a phone call, or even better yet, a site visit with every charity we supported, that'd be wonderful, but there just isn't the time for that. So if it is anonymous, usually you're not going to get a huge gift that way. Those sites are really useful for the $500 and $1,000 gifts. That's not how you're going to find your lead sponsor of something. So if it is a small gift, most companies don't expect stewardship for the little ones. They don't have time to look through the thank you letters or the cute cards that the kids in your program made. It's just the biggest gifts that you should do serious stewardship with. And if it is a large gift, you're probably not getting it through the website. But if you are looking to expand a relationship with a funder that you've only been able to get money through the website on, find something that they might want to fund that aligns with what they've already been doing, but is bigger. Because if you're going to ask them for more money, eventually you're going to hit the monetary point where they're going to say, well, we need to meet you, or we at least need to have a phone call. So if they've been doing $1,000 and you get them up to $5,000, then maybe when you hit 10, that's when you meet them. Or attend the events that they are bigger funders at so that you can maybe meet them. So, sometimes it is worth buying a single ticket to a charity's ball or annual luncheon just so that you can meet funders that are funding you at a lower level or whom you've never met. That kind of schmoozing is expected.
What sort of materials should be included in a proposal?
Honestly, the fewer the better if you're soliciting a corporation, because they have a lot on their plate. When you send something to foundations, they're going to want more. But for a company, if it's for a particular one-off program, then numbers you've got on how many people usually attend that, the different levels that you're soliciting for, what the opportunities are for visibility on their end, the publicity outreach that you expect. We're going to send X number of e-blasts and we have 10,000 subscribers in our e-blast list, or we're planning X number of Facebook posts and we have 5,000 Facebook fans. You don't need to include a budget. It's not going to be meaningful to them. They don't know how much it should cost to put on your programming. And you really don't want them getting into the weeds on that. If it's a first-time gift, it's not a bad idea to put in a board list because they might know those people. It's not a bad idea to put in a one-pager on your organization, but not more than one page. Have your PR people help you cut that down to size. It should not be a blow-by-blow of the last 50 years. You don't need to put a 990 in. They don't have time to look at it. If you've got a slick annual report, that's not a bad idea because the work's already done. But I'd make sure it's not more than a few pages because they're just not going to look at it. And if it's, highly produced and looks expensive, that doesn't resonate well either.
How long should we wait before following up on a proposal that we've submitted?
I wish there was a rule of thumb here, but there's not, because you don't know how many proposals they've been looking at. And also, if you're sending a proposal for a massive, multi-year underwriting project or a capital campaign, that's going to, have to go through maybe a couple committees, and they're maybe going to have to reach out to corporate to see if corporate can help float the bill, versus a one-off program of less money or less frequency. So there isn't an easy rule of thumb, but I would say the more money you're asking for, or the more complex the project you're asking them to underwrite, the longer you wait. At minimum, I would say a week, week and a half, but that's for the easiest, peasiest thing for them to answer. And do keep in mind, a lot of companies have phone systems that track hang-ups. So don't call and hang up and call and hang up and call and hang up because you're waiting to get somebody to pick up the phone, because they'll see it in their system. Who is this stalker I've got that called 10 times in one morning? Just, after the second time, leave a message or email, because a lot of people will email back from their phone quickly, when they're between meetings. Yes, I got it. Haven't looked at it yet, or I got it. It's in my pile, or no, I haven't seen it. Resend it to me. Most of us prefer email because it's faster and it avoids, what might turn into a long phone call they don't have the time for right then.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have for questions. And I think that all of this has been extremely helpful. I wanted to, here is Joy's contact information.
Sorry, forgot about that.
That's okay. We'll include that in the PDF of the presentation. Just to let you know, you can join us again in 2 months, April 18th at 2 p.m., when we'll be talking about social media, cultivating and retaining your online audience, with Lizabelle Stella at the Blanton Museum of Art here in Houston. If you have any recommendations for topics and or speakers, be sure to email those to me at derek@arts.texas.gov. After you leave the webinar, you'll be asked to answer a few brief questions to help us keep improving these webinars. As I mentioned before, it'll be archived on Vimeo, and a PDF of the slide presentation will be sent to you. A big thank you again to Joy Partain for sharing your time with us today. We can't do these webinars without people like you who graciously volunteer their time to share their knowledge with the field. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And everybody, on that LinkedIn page, you'll find articles I've written about this and other topics of interest for corporate philanthropy and donor relations, so feel free to look. And thank you, everybody, for participating. It's helpful to know that people want to know this kind of thing, because most of us, I'm on the other side now, but most funders do want you to know how to work with them well. They're not trying to dodge you, so they want a good relationship too.
Great. Well, thanks to all of you for joining us today, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.